Welcome, everyone. We're going to wait 1 minute to get started. Okay, I'm going to jump in. So welcome to today's Hanji, Current Perspectives from Korea, a lecture by Aimee Lee. Before we get started, closed captioning is available. If you would like to turn on captions, navigate to the bottom of your Zoom screen and click the CC button to show subtitles. This is the fourth lecture of 5 in our Global Perspectives in Hand Papermaking series. The series features papermakers from around the world, exploring historic and contemporary approaches to papermaking through talks by individuals with expertise in papermaking in Japan, Korea, India, Chile, and Spain. Among the topics discussed will be traditional fibers, tools, and papermaking techniques, as well as contemporary trends in production papermaking and artistic experimentation. Thank you to the Wingate Foundation for their generous support of this program. Aimee Lee is an artist who makes paper, writes, and advocates for Korean papermaking practices. She has a BA from Oberlin College and an MFA from Columbia College Chicago. Her initial Fulbright research led to the first Hanji studio in North America, an award-winning book, Hanji Unfurled, and a studio practice that includes jisung, jumchi, paper textile, botanical paper, and natural dyeing techniques. She travels the world to teach, exhibit, and serve as a resident artist while also building and enhancing studios for Korean and East Asian papermaking. She teaches artist books at the Cleveland Institute of Art and is an Ohio Arts Council Heritage Fellow. Her recent Fulbright Senior Scholar research focused on toolmaking for Hanji, and her artwork is deeply rooted in her ongoing investigations of traditions and stories from her heritage and lived experience. Hanji is Korean paper and has a nearly millennia-old history of supporting creative, government, military, household, and ritual purposes. In this lecture, you will learn about the techniques behind making Hanji alongside stories from the current landscape of papermakers who still labor in obscurity to produce a variety of paper that persists today. So this talk and demonstration will last about 40 minutes. If you have any questions, navigate to the bottom of your Zoom window and click the Q&A function and enter your questions there. And we'll answer everything live in the last 15 minutes or so of the session. This webinar is being recorded and it'll be made available to you via our website and our YouTube channel in about 2 weeks, maybe a little bit sooner. Thank you, Aimee Lee, for being with us here today. We're so happy to have you. And thank you everyone for being here. Aimee, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thanks, Willa. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks to Danae. I just wanted to make a note actually that it's just a talk and not a demo, that the demo will be on Sunday, but I'm going to share my screen to get started. I am about a month back from Korea. So I just was for 5 months on a Fulbright grant doing more research on Korean paper making tools. But of course, because I'm so focused on Hanji, which is Korean paper. So Han is Korean and Ji is paper. So together that word Hanji means Korean paper. So you don't need to say Hanji paper because it's redundant. It would be like saying swordfish, swordfish, fish, or supermarket, market. So it's just Hanji, or you can say Korean paper. So I wanted to share, I'll share a little bit of the tool making at the end, but wanted to go a little in depth with the people that I met this time, there are two particular mills that I was spent a lot of time in the southern part of the country. So this is an area near Jirisan. So that's in Gyeongsang province. And it's incredibly mountainous, very beautiful. And that's where I was able to meet Lee Sang-ok, and he's in Hamyang. And there apparently was also another paper mill actually in Jirisan. So Jiri-san is Jiri Mountain. San means mountain in Korean. So he's very close to there, but the other paper mill is now shut down. Sometimes I think he uses the name Jiri-san Hanji, so it can be confusing if you end up purchasing, but he is the proprietor and was recently, this year actually named the intangible cultural property holder of Hanji making in his province. And so from this point on, that's about the same as if we say kind of colloquially national or regional treasure. So Gyeongsang-do is like a province, like states in America. And so he still also lives in a very rural area where they do a lot of farming, and they do their own subsistence farming, as well as they might farm a little to sell, but they do paper making seasonally. And so this is an image from a book where he's actually making paper. His wife is in the background holding a screen. I wasn't able to see him making paper because we went when they were in a preliminary step, not sheet forming. So let's see if I can. That's just to show that they are right along this stream. Very, very clean water. You can see the paper mulberry fiber that's soaking in there and cleaning. So I got to see this process of steaming all the mulberry bark. And so they've covered it in blankets and plastic and blankets again, and there's a wood fire underneath. And they've been steaming this for hours. And then we got there in the morning and they were ready to uncover it, because once you cut down the paper mulberry tree, which is what they use for paper making for the most part in Korea, you have to get the outer bark off the inner woody core. And so you can see that the outer bark is pulled away from the inner woody core, and only then can you actually strip off the bark. And so then they take it out of the steaming container. And then in this case, I was able to go there because the National Forest Science Institute was doing a project where they're growing paper mulberry trees from 45 different regions in Korea in one kind of plot that they have in Jinju, which is also in Southern Korea. And so these are all marked. They're all different types. It's the same species growing in different regions, but now being grown in one place. And they're trying to see how much bast fiber they can get from each regional type. And so again, you can see that where that inner core is sticking out is because the outer has pulled away. And then all of their workers start stripping all of the bark. And so this is also a manual process, and it requires a lot of labor. They have issues because a lot of the older people in the area are drawing on kind of like a social security, but and so they would rather just get that than earn money, because if you earn too much money, you can't draw down on that fund. And so this research team of young people are out there, and they've weighed the entire tree, and then now they're weighing the bast fiber, and then they'll dry it and weigh it again, and then they'll strip it and weigh it again. And so that's what's going on with this process. That's why there are all these yellow tags. Otherwise, they would just do it in big piles. And so the next time I was able to visit, they were then scraping, and this takes a lot longer. This takes more than a day, and where they're pulling away the outer bark from the inner bark. So they're getting rid of the outer two layers, the black bark and the green bark, even though this mill tends to keep a lot of the green bark on. And then again, so this is the black bark in bundles. This is the white bark. This is what is used for the paper making. This is what's scraped away and it's saved. Later, you can make a secondary grade paper to wrap other things. These are the inner woody cores, and these are used for firewood. And then this is, if the stream for some reason, like the second time I went, they would have been doing construction upstream, so it was totally muddy. So if there are times where they can't be using that fresh water, then they have other containers like this where they can bring water in and soak fiber. But otherwise, they just hang it over this, they hang the fiber over a bridge, and they built a little pool area in the stream, a holding area, to be able to soak the fibers right there. And then this is the process of drying the white bark so that you can store it, and then you can just store it indefinitely and you just start using it when you need it. So this is their storage area. And this is also a storage area here that's, you can tell, a very old building with the old wooden lattice doors, that, and all the Hanji has been ripped off, but normally that would be all covered with Hanji. So they're holding straw to burn, and then also sesame to burn. And this would be, they'd burn it and then use the ash to create a pot ash that would make an alkaline solution, and you cook the white bark in that solution. And then just to get a sense of the space that they have, so their paper mill is, they have 2 vats and they have 1 beater, and they use these plastic dividers to kind of divide the space. And it's a pretty old beater. They probably need to replace it because it's rusting, so that's not great. But you can see that they have the traditional curved knives of the Asian, because technically it's not actually beating, it's pulling apart the long fibers. And then you can see they have the bamboo slats on the bottom, so that when they empty out the pulp, it just drains out. So this is like a screening system. And then you can see the 2 vats. This is one that they must have used recently enough because there's water and pulp in there. And then this is the other one that's empty, and there's a screen on top. And I wanted to show these because this is Burdock Burrs, and those are used to actually clean those screens, those bamboo screens, instead of, don't want to actually spray it down with water with high pressure jets, because you can actually get more fiber stuck in the thread. So traditionally these were used, and this is their heat dryer, and then their drying brushes that are all made by hand. And then not too far away in the same province, so Gyeongsangnam-do, is an area that's also very rural, and this is where there's another paper maker, and I just wanted to show, I happened to be there during onion season, and so I actually could barely find a room because all the migrant workers were coming in from other countries to harvest all the onions, and that's what all these orange bags are. But if you drive along the road going to the paper mill, you see all that. It was also when they were pulling out and drying all the garlic, and this is in a space that's right across from Shinhyunse traditional Hanji. And so he is just located downstream of here. It's kind of at the base of that mountain. And this is a view from his mill. So he's right next to this stream. There was a time when this came up and flooded, and they had a very difficult time because they lost so much fiber and had other damage. But this is the other side, and they're actually right here building a new road through it. And I'm a little concerned about how much that will affect the traffic, because it's a raised road, and the dust and things like that. But hopefully that might make it easier for people to visit and come in, though I don't necessarily think that's neither here nor there. But so they're building a little more infrastructure in these rural areas. And so this is his paper mill, and he built it almost 20 years ago. And this is his walking out is actually his apprentice, Park Jae-gyun, and he's been there for over 3 years. And so here's his dry paper or dry fiber storage, and he gets his fiber from the northern part of Gyeongsang-bukdo, so North Gyeongsang province, and then he stores it at in the back of his paper mill. Here's a soaking tank for before they start steaming and cooking the fiber. That kind of round rim is where they steam the fiber with the potash. So you can see how that works. You have to get on top of climb on top of that to really stir it. And then after the fiber is cooked, he has an employee who goes through, and she has to by hand pick out all the little remaining bits of bark. And he used to have another employee, but she's fell ill, so she hasn't been around for a while. And then this is his stamper in case he wants to do the traditionally you'd beat with wooden mallets, but That's a lot of labor. So he has a stamper, but mostly he uses the beater, the knife beater. So this is Shinhyunse, and he's in the little town he's in Uideong, and he's not only the provincial treasurer, but the national treasurer of Hanji making. And this all happened when I was there. So first he was named the provincial treasurer along with Is Hanok, and then he was named the national treasurer. So this is what his blades look like, those curved blades that are sharpened, and then his empties out into this trough instead of just having the bamboo. There's bamboo underneath probably, but it's also lined with fabric. And then here are his seeds to plant the hibiscus flowers for the roots to make this mucilage. So this is very necessary for all Asian paper making, because you need to be able to suspend the fibers in water when you're doing this kind of process of passing the screen through with constant motion. So you can't have the fibers be clumping on the screen or falling to the bottom of the vat. So this is kind of the mucilage, the goo that comes out of those roots. And he farms all of that as well. And then this is Park Chae-gyun, his apprentice, adding more of the mucilage to the vat. So in between, and then this is him with his wife, and they're setting up to unravel this plastic netting so that they can get these threads. And these threads are used to as parting threads. So you put them between every 2 sheets of paper. And then his hydraulic press, which he's had for years. One of his heat dryers, which you can see has 3 surfaces you can dry paper on. And then his other heat dryer that has 2 flat surfaces, and this doesn't rotate, powered by steam. And then his wooden boards that are in a different section to dry the papers. And then all the implements you need to be drying papers, and then dried papers before they've been curated. And then this is his tochim machine, and this is a hammer that goes up and down, up and down. And that's if he wants to burnish his papers. And this is much more expensive, makes a much more expensive product. So it's not often requested, but was a feature of Hanji for a long time, because it smooths out the fibers, it compacts them and makes the ink bleed a lot less, makes it a lot tougher. And then this is, I had showed you the Burdock Burrs before. This is what the plant looks like when it's growing. And then you can see this is before the flowers have come out. And right before the flowers flower, you're going to want to pull off those burrs, collect them. You can see some of the flowers here, and then dry them. And then you have your built-in scrubbies basically to clean your screen. So that's what he was using. And then I want to, sorry, it's a little, it's noisy, this heater. But I found this amazing that he just put dry Hanji. He said it's good paper, but it was too weak. It had no strength, so he's recycling it. And this is when I was practicing, and also when his apprentice was practicing. So about 2/3 of that is raw fiber that's been cooked. Then 1/3 would be the recycled paper. And this is his apprentice agitating the vat. And they also have another agitator in the vat, as well as just doing the manual agitation. And then this is actually oversized Hanji. I want to say it's about something like 91 by 110 centimeters. This is really, 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 really difficult. And you can't tell because he looks so small, but he's incredibly strong. This is it's very heavy to have this amount of water and slurry. But you can see he's moving it side to side across the frame, across the screen. He had already done it once forward to front to back, and he's putting down that thread. And you can see the sheet's going to go right down on top of the other one. So he's turning that first sheet, and then the next sheet he won't turn. And that's a technical thing that if you have questions about, I'll explain later. But it's characteristic of Korean paper only. And then he passes a rolling log so that helps remove air bubbles. And then he's going to snap the screen off and then pull it away. So this is paper that he said, this was in April of this year. He said after this, he plans on never doing this again in his life because it's just so difficult. He uses the tweezers to pick out any impurities. And then starts again, just going front to back and then side to side. And the back of the frame is called a fire rope. So then after they have the whole post ready, they load it into the hydraulic press, and this they have to do together because it's so heavy. This is, I want to say, this is probably like 200 sheets, but remember, all the sheets are 2-ply, so it's actually 400 sheets. And Chaegyun he's just checking to make sure it's centered underneath the jack so that it'll get even pressure. And then they'll just pile up pieces of wood until it reaches the bottom and then press that very slowly over at least a day or two. And then this is his remaining employee, and she's in her 80s, and she's pulling away those threads so that she can separate each sheet of paper, which is actually, remember, 2 sheets of paper that are being dried together. And then she'll pull away 4 at a time, and then she brings it over to this wood board and uses a large brush to affix it to the board. And this, you have to press it just the right amount so that it's not too wet and doesn't want to stick and create wrinkles. And you have to be able to make sure you don't get any weird air bubbles or that you tear the paper. And so for these sheets, these are regular size sheets that are, I want to say, about 63 by 93 centimeters, almost about 2 by 3 feet. And then the way that these boards are set up, they have pieces of wood at the top and bottom, so you just flip it over. And even if you drop the board, the paper wouldn't actually touch the ground. And so then you can dry 4 sheets actually on one board. These are already dry, so she's just going to pull away the sheet. And then you can see that stack of paper, dry paper, that she's piling up behind her, or at the end of this kind of long building, which is where they dry all the paper. And then I also wanted to show you, so this was a little bit more of the research I was doing, where I was very concerned when I first went to Korea, I want to say 14 years ago, because I knew that this is the only person left doing these screens to make Hanji, that you need a bamboo screen. So remember, the water is flowing on top of the screen and it's all handmade. And there's only this one person and his wife left making them. So Yubaegun is in Jeonju, and he is the Jeollado treasure, intangible cultural property holder of making Hanji screens specifically. And his history is that he actually was a paper maker and had a whole paper mill in Jeonju, and kind of saw the writing on the wall and was like, he already knew how to make screens, and his father knew, because back in the day, all paper makers could do all the different steps, and the labor wasn't so specialized. And so he decided, I'm just going to close down the paper mill, but just continue making screens, which was smart because no one else. Eventually, there was one guy, I think, left doing it near Mr. Shin, and he passed away. So he's the only one. So he has a corner on the market. But the issue is that he's just turned 80, 81. And his mind is not quite there, so his wife is doing a lot of the work. He lives here, and this is Jeonju's Hanok Maul, which is a Hanok Village, and Hanok is a traditional Korean home. And these aren't actually the original traditional homes, but they created just a part. I mean, you can see the rest of the city behind. They created one part of the city that's just for these kinds of buildings, and they have different kinds of shops, and it's a huge tourist area, but also have major museum and natural portrait gallery of the royal family, and then different kinds of museums. So they live right in there, and they take bamboo that's already been processed to a certain point. So these are all these slats that they've cooked in salt water, and then they need to then split them into tiny splints. And then after that, Mr. Yu pulls all of the splints one by one through this draw plate that has these holes, And then he has to do that at least probably 3 times because the hole will get successively smaller, and that shaves off the sides of the splint so that you go from kind of a squarish looking splint to a round one. And they're all exactly the same diameter, so that when you start weaving the screens, they're very even. So, so this is the process of essentially weaving these screens, and it's very basic, but it requires a lot of knowledge in terms of how you control any kind of bamboo that might be a little warped. And so this is his wife doing that work. And it looks very simple, but it requires a lot of knowledge and resources. And so they were not in a position to really train me the way that I wanted to learn all the different steps. And so I went to one other person who was also a 전라도, like a regional treasure of bamboo blind making. So this is making bamboo screens like to hang in the windows, but not specifically for Hanji. And he is also in his 80s and not in great health, and his family has a lot of issues. And so I could only visit him in Tamyang, which is very famous for their bamboo forests. And he just kind of showed me the steps, but he wouldn't let me he wouldn't let me do anything, because traditionally, apparently, that you aren't supposed to give women knives because they can hurt themselves, which I think is interesting because I'm sure women use knives to cook there all the time. But so I was lucky that I was able to meet Cho Dae-yong in Tongyang, and that's a south, so in the southeastern corner, and it's right on the coast, and it's just all these, I want to say hundreds or thousands of islands, at least hundreds, little tiny islands, and it's so beautiful, but also was the site of a lot of naval battles with Japan, because that would be where they would try to enter the peninsula. And so Cho Dae-yong is the national treasure of bamboo blind making. So you can see here, these are decorative blinds that are used in palaces, they're used in palanquins, they're used during ancestral rites. And so I thought, this is that area, this area with all these, it's just amazing. I actually wasn't able to see that much because I was studying so much with him, but he did take me one day to see this view. And so he was able to show me all the steps, and he's right now about 70 years old. And so we climbed into this bamboo, it's just like a park, and he had found some bamboo. I don't even know how he got in this far. There was no path in. And this is where he's showing me essentially, if it looks good to my eye, it's the right bamboo, because he's been doing this since he was a child, and he learned from his father. So you have to get about 3 to 4 year old bamboo of a certain type. Ideally, those nodes are really far apart from each other. And so cutting them down is easy, but then getting it laid down in such a dense forest so that you can cut it into pieces to transport is a little trickier. So this is where we're getting 6 pieces ready to climb out. And then you have to peel off the outer skin. So some people go up and down. He does it in one direction, but you want to take off the right amount, but not too much, because that outer grain is what you need to make these blinds, whether it's for Hanji or anything else. The inner grain of the plant is too weak. So, so now you have all of the skin peeled off, and then you go through this process of splitting it. So you take the whole, and this is different. So the difference with the way that he works and the way that you want to use bamboo for Hanji screens is that he keeps all the nodes intact. For Hanji making, you cut out all the nodes. That will cause warping, and then the paper would be evenly on the screen. So he goes in half. Sorry about the volume. And then he goes in quarters. And if you notice, he's actually going to keep this. He always keeps it in the same direction, because traditionally you weave these so that the nodes are always falling in the same place, and you get this beautiful zigzag pattern. But it's just this, he starts with one large knife, and it's all just done manually. So he has, this is kind of his dirty, studio, and then he has a clean studio in a different part of the city. But this is his first studio before I think he became a national treasure. And now he's just cutting out the excess, the nodes, the nodes on the inside, and then he has to split again. So you go from 1 tube to 2 pieces to 4 pieces. Now we're going to go down to 8. And so this is, I didn't set up the slides for the knives, but this is also when I started to be concerned about, first, how am I going to find bamboo in the States that's the right species and type? Second, where am I going to get the right knives? Because these are very specific knives that are sharp in the front, but really wide in the back to help split that bamboo for you. Now he's taking out, this is the first pass of taking that inner grain out, which is all garbage. They'll just burn it. So you can take, but you can't take it all out at once. So after he does that, now he's going to split it again. So we were going, what was it, 8th to 16th to, I lose track after a while. But, and you can see how quickly he works. He just splits it. And it's not that easy for it to go straight. So when I did this, I just got a lot of toothpicks. But so you have to do this in stages of taking out the grain and then splitting and then taking out the inner grain again. So here, only one layer of the inner grain has been taken out, and now he's going for the next layer. So this is also, you have to be really good. This is why the first person didn't want me to handle a knife, because you can see your hand is right there, and if the knife goes in the wrong direction, you can just end up cutting it. So, and then he has to kind of work a little harder at the nodes to shave away the right amount. And then now he's going to split again. So we're getting down to much smaller splints. And this one piece, he's probably going to turn into 4. So he's doing that manually like this with a knife. So Mr. Yu, when he does it for Hanji making, he actually does it a little differently, where he makes cuts at the top of each wide piece, soaks it in water, and then he just uses his hands to kind of force all of them to come apart. And so I've done both. Both of them make your hands hurt. This one requires a lot more knife skills. And then finally, to get the even splints, he has a draw plate. And Mr. Cho actually, he just finds like pieces of metal and hammers it flat. And then he has a series of nails to make, you just have to make your own holes. And you have to keep making them, because after you draw about maybe 2 feet through the holes, you have to start again. So, and then at that point, you're ready to go ahead and start weaving. So, and this is also, this makes it look easy. I haven't showed you all the intermediary steps of getting all the thread onto the bobbins and setting up your frame. And, but so this is where we're looking at the Hanji screen that was our model. And then in his hands is the screen that we worked on together to try to replicate it. And so the fortunate thing is that he's actually now become much more interested in making Hanji screens, not just the bamboo screens for traditional use. So it's possible maybe we'll have another tool maker. And so on the left, you can see that's the actual Hanji screen, and that's actually from Mr. Shin in Uryong. And then on the right is my screen that we haven't finished yet. You have to edge it in cloth, but you can see it's not perfect, but it's similar. So I'm gonna stop sharing here, and then Will, if there are any questions, just let me know.
Thanks, Amy. Right now we have one question, and I'm sure more will filter in just a minute. Someone asked, I'm interested in the grass brushes. So when you were showing videos of someone adhering the paper to wooden tabletops to dry, have you made those before? How are those grass brushes made?
Yeah, I haven't made them. And that was something I talked to some of my research contacts about. So they will use, there's actually, let me see if I can pull up. They'll use grass and they'll also use reeds. And I guess it depends on what you're looking for, but there's definitely a method to it in terms of being able to get the right, like you have to harvest at the right time and use at the right time. And I can't remember if you also have to boil them, because if you don't, they'll just like poof up and not be usable. But those are, yeah, I think they're very straightforward in terms of Korea having a culture where I mean, really every culture that started a long time ago has a history of making things from nature. And so, sorry, I'm looking for I wanted to try to pull up those images. So let me just quickly share. So if you look at these again, and then you can see a little closer, it looks like they're just bundles, like multiple bundles that they then tie together in various places as you go down. But you can also see that, so the ends of these are grasses that are solid inside, like the stems are solid. But then you can see on that left side that there are some where the reeds would be hollow. And so I think what I was told is you had to be careful with those reeds, that if you didn't do the right thing, that they would just poof up and then turn and then not be functional. But I mean, it's a good question because it's one part of all of the concerns I have about, if there's so few people. So at this point, we have less than 20 people in Korea making Hanji, and very few of them doing I wanted to show you the 2 people doing the super traditional style with a suspended frame. And then, so there are so few of them, but then there's only 1 person left doing these screens. The brushes, I think they already, like people still to this day, like even at the university, Jeonbuk University in Jeonju, where I was being hosted, even the like groundskeepers, they still use brushes that are made out of twigs and things like that. And even in Seoul, they use brushes that are made out of bamboo branches and things like that. So that isn't as much of a concern, but there's still a lot of specialized knowledge, like the whole like drying burdock burrs. That was something that I didn't learn the first time around when I was in Korea. And then that was just kind of a given. Like, of course, these people knew that that's what you do. You would never go. And it was interesting because then the wife of the screen maker said, oh, just use those blue sponges to clean the screens. And so it's interesting that the person who makes the tool says to do that, but the person who uses the tool says something else. So, but yeah, long story short, I don't know enough about the brushes, but those are the things that I wish someone else would go and do the research on. So.
That leads really well into 2 other questions. How do you hold the burdock burrs to clean the screens?
Oh, you just, you take a bunch of them and you put it underwater. The screen is underwater. It's in a vat of water, and you just hold them and just softly kind of brush against. You just rub it against, and then you check them to kind of see. And if they start getting really clogged with fiber, you get rid of them and you just get another bunch. So it's all done underwater, and they are a little prickly, but it's once they're soaked, it's not so bad.
Are the artisans themselves concerned that there's no one to carry on their craft?
I don't think so. They're too busy just working. Even the situation, I mean, it's incredible that actually Mr. Shin has an apprentice, and that only happened because Professor Park Ji-sun, who is at Yongin University, not far from Seoul, she's an incredible paper conservator, and she had a student who went through the grad program who's Park Jae-gyun, and she was like, I think you would actually be a really great paper maker. Do you want to do that? And kind of convinced him to go into, so he studied 2 years with my teacher at Changjibang, further north. He spent 3 months in Japan. I'm now forgetting where exactly, but and then then he came to Mr. Shin, and he had come many, many times begging him to accept him, and he wouldn't. I mean, Mr. Shin wouldn't. And then the only reason that he finally agreed to, well, part of it is he didn't have the money to pay someone, but what happened is that his paper was used by conservators in Italy to repair and restore Italian national treasures. And so they had this huge ceremony, and the governor of the area where Mr. Shin is was like, you have to come to Italy with us because you made the paper. And he said, I'm very busy with paper orders. I'm not going anywhere. And they literally had to drag him to Italy to this whole, like, you know, pomp and circumstance. And at that kind of ceremony, this conservator came up to him, to both of them, and she was crying, and she said, oh my God, thank you so much for continuing to make this amazing paper. And Mr. Shin was shocked that like anyone would feel this way about what he's been doing since he was 16 years old. And then the governor was like, oh, I think maybe this is like something we should try to preserve. And so then that county decided to use their funds to pay for an apprentice. And at that point, Mr. Shin finally accepted Chegunshi, and because he didn't have to pay him. But even then he's like, is he doing a great job? Like, when I see it, he seems to be doing great. But then Mr. Shin is like, oh, at this rate, he should be working a lot faster. He should be able to do these things. And it's not like the best personality match, because Chegunshi is so quiet, and Mr. Shin comes from a part of Korea where the men are very kind of gruff, and like it always seems they're yelling at you, but they're not yelling at you. That's just how they talk. And so it's a challenge. There are very few people who are actually training real apprentices. And the other problem is that they don't want their children to take this on because it's such a difficult lifestyle, but they also don't want to teach anyone who are not their children. So this is a major problem.
Are the papers that Mr. Sheen produces available for sale?
Yes. So Kim Bo-kyung of Fides International, so FIDES. She's based in Seoul, but she actually is a wholesaler. She supplies to Talus and Paper Connection and Hiromi, and so they all carry different things. I think Talus and Paper Connection are the only places that actually carry Mr. Shin's paper, but you can, for larger orders, you can contact her. And yeah, there's no kind of, aside from those retailers in the US, it's not like you can go to his website. He doesn't do any of that. But yes, they are for sale, and he's continually making paper. He's now about 74, 75.
Okay. How long does it take to produce a sheet of Hanji from beginning to end?
I mean, I guess it depends if you're like beginning to the end, like where's the beginning? Is the beginning cutting down the tree? Because if its beginning is cutting down the tree, then it takes probably like 2 weeks, maybe. And also because you never make one sheet of paper at once, right? You're always making big batches. So because you have to cut down the tree, you have to steam the tree, you have to strip the bark, you have to scrape the bark, you have to cook the bark that you've made lye for, then you have to rinse it, pick out all the impurities, you have to beat it, and then you have to make the formationate, that mucilage from another plant that you've harvested, and then you can start doing the sheet formation, then you have to press out the water, then you have to part the sheets, board the sheets, dry the sheets, curate the sheets, and sometimes hammer the sheets. So it really depends on where you're starting. Like, so many people think paper making just starts when you like go to the vat with all the water. Isn't this so magical? But it starts like many steps behind that. So I mean, I don't really have a good answer. It's that, and I mean, if you're talking about just from the vat, like you could make a sheet of paper like in a few minutes, but it's not going to be ready because you have to make 100 more sheets to then make it worth going into the press. So you could spend a day paper making, maybe spend a couple days paper making. Like when I was training next to Chegunshi, he would spend a couple days building a big post, then they would press it overnight, and then his employee would board it, and then so that would be within a few days. Yeah, but that's again with the recycled fiber, and then also the fiber that she's been picking all day. So
That leads into a question about mulberry trees. Someone asked, are there enough mulberry trees to use for Hanji? Are they grown specifically for Hanji?
So they used to just grow wild everywhere and there was a lot of it. The issue now in Korea, like a lot of developed nations, is that development has taken away all of the land for like high rises and whatever the things that people think that they need. And so there's a lot less. And so people have been trying to figure out ways of growing in other parts of the world where the labor costs are low or where the growing seasons are long. So that's Southeast Asia. A lot of the paper mulberry that we get in the States comes from Thailand. It's not of the best quality, but so this is why the National Forest Science Institute is doing this project where they're trying to figure out which types of, in which regions do they maybe have the most bast fiber, because then maybe we'd want to focus on those plants or grow in those regions. But it's enough for now because there are so few people making it, but it's really not enough. It's not really enough. So that's also an issue.
Yeah. Are you finding that milkweed works well as an alternative to Hanji, or is that just a separate realm?
Yeah, it works great. Milkweed works really well. And that's why I, for many years, actually have been just shifting over to using milkweed as a fiber in the Hanji vat because it's native to North America. I don't have to use any fossil fuels to bring it around from either Korea or Japan or Thailand or any place that it's growing. It's different. And so, of course, that's a difference. But I mean, my concern is I'm documenting what's going on in Korea. I'm part of a lineage, but it's not my job to do it totally traditionally here because I can't, because this is not Korea. So, but yeah, there are different plants, and Winifred Lutz did amazing research years and decades ago. And so that's, if you ever go to Timothy Barrett's Japanese papermaking book, the appendix that Winifred wrote is incredible. And so she talks about good plants for Asian style papermaking because she was told by a Japanese papermaker, like, what's up with you weird Americans? Why do you want to use the plants from Japan? Why don't you must have plants in America that would work. And don't you want to kind of make your own style of paper, even if it's in, using a lot of the techniques from Asia?
Wow, that sounds amazing. You were so efficient about going through these questions. I think we'll have time for all of them. So someone just had a comment that it was a wonderful slide presentation and video presentation. Thank you, so interesting. Someone asked if you were ever at the Vermont Studio Center making blue paper works 2 years ago.
Not 2 years ago, I was there in 2007. So it's been a long time, yeah. I was doing more performance art then and installation work.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the process of weaving screens?
I mean, as you can see, there are so many steps. So the issue with that is, for me, you're going into a whole different plant. So you have to deal with, now it's like, I know very little about bamboo. So you're dealing with bamboo that has like hundreds and hundreds of species. You have to get the right kind. Some would be too soft, some would be too brittle. What's the right kind that would work, that go in and out of water? So you have to understand about bamboo harvesting, where to get the bamboo, how to split it, how to get the good knives. I had to go to at least, I went to one blacksmith and to get these bamboo knives, and was told I was ripped off. And then I went to another, it's like the tool issue is a major issue. And that's why I'm doing all this research on people who make tools for paper making. But so then you saw those steps where you go from the whole tube of bamboo all the way down to the splints. Once you have the splints ready, for Hanji making, you have to cut out all the nodes. You have to get rid of the nodes. For regular screen weaving, you leave all the nodes intact. You just weave with nice long splints. You have a frame that has little wheels on it, so you can kind of move it as you work, because often the screens can get really, really wide. And some of the screens that Mr. Cho was working on, he stands at because they're so big, and he just walks along. He walks and walks back, watches TV while he's doing it. And so, and then traditionally you would use silk. Well, so for paper making, you use horsehair and but you'd have to tie knots because horsetails are only so long. And then they switched to silk that was coated in persimmon juice to help waterproof it. So silk threads, and now they just use nylon like fishing line. But you have to measure out enough line and enough threads to then wrap one side on a metal bobbin or some kind of weight, and the other side on the other, and then hang it over the frame so that it's even. And then you start, and so once you do that for, we had at least 60 of those lines going, I think, or maybe it's 30. And then, but for every line you have 2 bobbins. And then where do you get those weights, right? So some people, I saw the guy in Tamyang actually took rebar and he chopped it in pieces and then sanded down, and then the sharp pieces, and then taped around it so you could wrap thread around it. But and so once you set up your bobbins, then you can start, essentially you just put down a splint, and then one bobbin goes back and the other bobbin goes forward, and they cross. You just have to do that in the same direction. And then once you've done that across the whole splint, then you add another splint for the next row. For Hanji making, once the splint runs out, because then you've cut out the notes, they're a little shorter. As soon as the splint runs out, you put another splint next to it. It's a butt join. And then you just keep weaving. And so, and there's also, I didn't get into the technicalities of, the lines change directions halfway through the screen for Hanji making, but there are a lot of little things and like little secrets that only people who do this for their whole lives know. So, and then there's also the edging. You have to cloth edge all 4 sides of the Hanji screen.
Okay, what next? What part of your journey or which process was the most physically moving to you that you would regret if lost?
I mean, I guess physically, it's really that sheet formation technique, because that's the most Korean part of something that I met a master dyer this trip, and she was saying that's because she was learning about Hanji through me, and she was saying what's so interesting about everything, that all different crafts of Korea, is that they don't require a frame. And that's more of a metaphor than anything else. But in paper making and Hanji making, it's actually very literal. There's no frame on top of that bamboo screen. So you have to be able to control how the water slides on and off of it. And I don't know of any other paper making techniques in the world that has no, they have decal sticks, there are decals, there's some kind of frame that holds the slurry in there, and you control it in there, and there can be a lot of technique within it. But this one is the only one I know where it's just open like that. You hold it with your 2 thumbs in the front, and actually I watched Mr. Shin one time demonstrate, and one of the thumbs wasn't even touching. Like it was like, like look ma, no hands, like, no hands on the handlebar kind of thing. So that I think would be the hardest thing to lose. But even, yeah, and then after that would be the kuching process, because from there, the traditional Korean way is that you have to create that pile of paper with no guides. So Japanese style, you have guards, and this time there's nothing. You have to freehand it, and so that's also an incredible skill that even I didn't really understand until this trip. So I think those would be kind of, that I wouldn't want to see go away.
Yeah. Radha's talk last week, she talked a little bit about bats that are built into the ground, and how people will tend to like lean to one side, or they have different methods of pulling sheets of paper from basically like dipping into the ground from a seated position. But the question about like bodily practice in paper making is an interesting question, just because it's such a bodily engaged craft. And learning about the different approaches and how people use their body in the process of paper making is interesting.
And it's very difficult. And Mr. Shin is he's bent over like this. It's a real effort for him to stand up straight. And it's because if you watch, because you're hunched over the vat like that, and it's an incredibly heavy load. So it's amazing that we have him, and he's in incredible health. But even though he smokes and drinks every day after work, which not to oblivion, but this was the first trip also where I thought I completely understand why people do drugs and drink every night after work, because it's so hard. It's really, it's like not even a, it's not even pleasure. It's just like, what can I do to relieve my body because it hurts so much?
Oh man, yeah. So someone said, I saw that the Japanese seem to have many tools for splitting bamboo via lots of little machinery, but Mr. Yu seems to do everything by one knife. Is that typical?
Well, I think Mr. Yu, he doesn't do, from my understanding, he doesn't seem to do the whole process from the very beginning. I think he might have done that in the past, but he goes to like a bamboo market and basically picks out what he likes. And then, they only showed me a couple knives, but it turns out those aren't even bamboo knives. They're actually saw sharpening files that have been sharpened on one end to create a knife. And so that's for like later stages. But from my understanding, like from seeing Mr. Cho work, you need a saw to cut down the bamboo, just like a hacksaw. Then you need a large bamboo knife to do the big splitting. Then you need a smaller bamboo knife to do the finer splitting. You need the draw plate to draw through. And there's a step that I didn't show you. To get the splints through the holes, you have to actually sharpen, like almost like make it into a skewer, like when you have shish kebabs, like there's a point at one end to stick through. So that you used to have to take a knife and shave it all off. And Mr. Yu does that, but Mr. Cho just takes a grinder, an electric grinder, and he kind of shaves that off. And then, yeah, so it's not a lot of splitting tools, but I've also seen there's a Chinese government put out a YouTube video of Chinese paper making several years ago, and they have some very interesting knife setups to split the bamboo. And I showed that to Mr. Yu and his daughter, who will become his successor. And so there don't seem to be as many jigs in Korea. It's like they just have these two knives, and it's like they do everything with that.
Yeah. So Sue asked, are there Korean artists who are interested in the process of paper making as like an artistic process?
Not really. The Korean artists interested in using Hanji usually just use it as a material, and their secret is who their paper maker is. Like they often won't tell you who they use. They tell their paper maker, like, please make my paper to these specifications. But the entire culture is different from the way that American artists see art making. Like paper making is kind of seen as, was traditionally very low class, peasant, prisoner, farmer, that kind of work. And so that wasn't something that you'd ever aspire to, whereas a kind of fine art would be a higher class, and it would be for people who had more education. And so even now, I think the artists, and maybe it's changed, but I haven't seen that. The interest is not in making the Hanji, because the work itself takes so much time. Why would you also worry about making the paper? So, but there's definitely kind of a class, and there are social, like cultural issues around that would make those artists less interested in making it. The other issue is that it's not very accessible. I mean, for me to have been able to have these opportunities, or, I was like begging people, or I had some connections and our schedules matched. And, and I was able to, literally this last time, I told you there was only one motel room left because of onion harvesting season. And then I had to leave because it was so disgusting. And so I left, and then miraculously a woman showed up to buy paper that day, who was like, where are you from? Where are you staying? And she said, you should stay with me. And so I could stay with a stranger a 10-minute walk away in an area that had no kind of motels, no stores, nothing. So if that's how it was for someone who speaks Korean and has been researching Hanji for like 15 years, then it's going to be just as hard for a Korean artist who maybe isn't even, wanting to like live in a rural area or do this kind of work. So I think there are different accessibility issues. And unfortunately, Korea hasn't come up with systems like they have for some of their other national kind of treasures, like music and performance, where like in Japan, where, there are cities designated, there are places where you can pay money and they will train you and they will house you and feed you. You just have to pay them money. And so, and you can learn all the steps, and they don't have anything like that in Korea yet.
So there are a couple questions that we weren't able to get to and comments, but I think we did like a pretty broad overview of questions. So hopefully there was overlap in the questions that we didn't answer. So yeah, things were at least partially answered live. And there are also some comments. I'll share those with you after the lecture, Amy, just so you get a chance to see everyone's nice comments. So this coming Sunday, Amy is also teaching a paper basketry course, paper basketry and introduction to Jisung. Again, it's this Sunday and it's from 1:30 to 3 p.m. Eastern time, but it's all virtual and it's a demonstration-based workshop. And registration is still open for that. And there will be a recording accessible after today. It takes us 1 to 2 weeks to upload that recording onto our website. But all of the recordings from this lecture series and lectures that we've given in the past, not related to the Global Paper Series, everything is available via our website and our YouTube channel. Yeah, Amy, thank you so much for a very in-depth talk today and for the efficiency in getting through all these questions.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Our last lecture for the Global Paper Series is happening next Wednesday, and it's a little bit earlier because we'll be meeting with Takao Mariki from Japan, and there's a 13-hour time difference. So it'll be at 10 a.m. and he will be joining us the wee hours of the morning, which he says that he's used to. But yeah, that'll be great. Okay, thank you everyone. Have a good rest of your day.